The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
The President of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili, spoke to the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, on how to strengthen Georgia's prospects for candidate status. According to Zurabishvili, Georgia counts on EU Parliament support. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili met with Otar Berdzenishvili, Georgia's newly appointed ambassador to Bulgaria. The PM congratulated him on the appointment and wished him success. The key directions of cooperation between Georgia and Bulgaria were discussed at the meeting. The Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, IDFI, has published a report on access to public information in Georgia 2022. The IDFI has been monitoring the availability of public information in Georgia since 2010. IDFI's systemic monitoring significantly contributed to the identification of key trends and problems in access to public information. According to the monitoring conducted by IDFI in 2022, the quality of access to public information in the country has decreased significantly compared to the previous year. The rate of response is 58% from public institutions in 2022 is the lowest observed since 2010. There was an established practice of a critical threshold of 80% on the rate of responses after 2013, which was successfully maintained until 2022. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elene, Kvanchilashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to update you on the main business and economics issues. Let me start with a brief overview of this week's economic news and outlook.
The world's leading non-profit organization, International Budget Partnership, responds to the recent events in Georgia. According to the organization, they are deeply concerned about developments in Georgia last week, where the national government has cracked down on thousands of people peacefully protesting a draft law that would restrain the independence of the country's vibrant civil society. International Budget Partnership notes they are thankful to see that the Georgian government has dropped to the draft law after widespread condemnation by the Georgian people. However, we were disappointed to see the Georgian Prime Minister misunderstood the country's ranking in the open budget survey to justify the law. We want to be clear about what the survey measures and what it doesn't measure. The open budget survey measures transparency, oversight, the formal public participation in national government budget processes. Georgia's score means that the government released timely and comprehensive information in their key budget documents. However, this does not mean that Georgia is fully transparent, accountable, and inclusive with its public outside the budget process, the document reads. Decision on the withdrawal of the draft law in the given circumstances was the most prudent and wise decision in the context of statehood, as we on the one hand demonstrated that nobody will ever be given a chance of destabilization, and on the other hand we said that we were aware of their very offensive plans, Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister, said. As the head of the government noted, opposition aimed for chaos and permanent destabilization and disorder to be maintained. They might have killed several young people themselves to ensure this. According to the Prime Minister of Georgia, by withdrawing the draft law, the authorities safeguarded the stability and peace in the country. We said that with this step, we cared for the most valuable asset of our country, stability and peace of our country, and refused the war. We refused the war policy, which was their key goal in holding these rallies, concluded Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. The Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development, Kvanchilashvili, said after the end of the government meeting that food prices started to reduce and the trend would continue further. According to him, the task of the government is not to restrict business but to create a competitive and effective environment. Our task is not to restrict business or to impose any type of obligations. They are not fair, although it's important for us to create a healthy, competitive and efficient environment. Of course, the competition agencies involved in the process, which conducted some researches and made an analysis and shared this information with the business. You have seen the trends that has already been reflected in the prices. A lot of organizations have started to reduce their prices. There will be a lot of promotions on various food products. We hope that this trend will continue and this will be reflected in the final inflation figures in February. We hope that the inflation rate will decrease further in March, said Kvanchilashvili. According to the minister, food prices will continue to decline. Georgian Parliament Speaker Papuashvili said the Parliament received the opinion from the Venice Commission regarding the law on de-oligarchization and law on common courts. We have already been given these conclusions in advance. As for the law on de-oligarchization, as you remember, there were two issues discussed during the political discussions. One issue was whether it was translation of the Ukrainian law, and the second, whether Georgia had the right to adopt the same law which is in Ukraine, given the context. It certainly sounds like the same discussion that we had on the foreign influence law, said Papuashvili. According to him, the Venice Commission does not object to the adoption of law on de-oligarchization by Georgia. As for the amendments to the law on common courts, the Venice Commission does not have any comments regarding the amendment that we have adopted, Papuashvili said, adding that the Commission provided additional recommendations that would be taken into account. Government delegation of Georgia and United Arab Emirates on Wednesday met in the Georgian capital city of Tbilisi to launch the third and final round of their negotiations on a free trade agreement between the states, the Ministry of Economy of Georgia announced. Georgian Deputy Economy Minister Gennady Arveladze said the agreement would open the United Arab Emirates market and its 10 million consumers with high purchasing power to Georgian exporting companies. The agreement will cover trade in goods, rules of origin and procedures of origin, customs administration and trade facilitation, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, trade protection measures, investment, trade in services, digital trade and other issues, Arveladze said. The state body announced the negotiations would be concluded on Friday before the signing of the deal at the later date. Tbilisi City Hall will activate two new programs for the replacement rehabilitation of old buildings in the historic districts of Georgia's capital, Tbilisi. Mayor Kakakaladze announced at the city government meeting. According to Kakakaladze, no buildings of cultural heritage will be replaced. Therefore, the Municipal Development Fund will be involved in their reconstruction. Based on the first program, a business sector with the consent of property owners will carry out the reconstruction works in line with the detailed project and budget determined by the Development Fund. In return, the City Hall will issue planning permits to the business persons on the land plots located outside the historic areas. According to the second program, the property owners will allow the City Hall to ensure the selling of auctioning of the property. The Tbilisi Hall will dispatch experts to determine the value. Then the property will be sold to the interested persons at the highest proposed price. The City Hall will cover the expenses of auctioning and the related procedures.
Georgia sees the importance of the opportunities that are present globally due to very unfortunate events, namely Russia's war in Ukraine. In this light, the potential of the Middle Corridor has grown immensely, and the Black Sea Cable project seems to be very realistic. For the Middle Corridor to be fast and efficient, it demands close cooperation among all the countries involved. This means that the Black Sea region itself gains a significant importance. Now, EUGBC addressed these profound, very positive changes for our country country and created a Black Sea platform which gathers all the important counterparts within the region to discuss all the important issues of further cooperation. Last week, the first meeting of the Black Sea platform was held.
Black Sea security is even more important than ever today, not only because Russia has launched this brutal war against Ukraine and complicated maritime movements through the Black Sea, including grain shipments that are vital for food security all around the world, but also because there are real opportunities for Georgia to play an important role in connecting Central Asia to Europe through the Middle Corridor. It's an important time to look at the opportunities for Georgia and to encourage Georgia to get started on building the infrastructure that is going to play a vital role. That's not just the undersea electricity cable to Europe, which of course is very important, but it's roads, it's railway, it's many other infrastructure projects that need to get started right away, linking Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Georgia to Europe. This is a tremendous opportunity to bring good jobs, more markets, a real improvement in the quality of life for every Georgian. And I sincerely hope that Georgia will get to work on this right away.
The energy cable to Europe, which is now being, the World Bank is now doing a feasibility study. It's a very promising project. We are all very anxious to see the results of the feasibility study once it's going to be ready in the autumn. We think that renewable energy is the most promising part of investment opportunities in the country, so we hope that both domestic and foreign investors will take these opportunities and invest.
We are currently supporting Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development and GSE, Georgia State Electric Systems, in terms of a full-fledged economic feasibility study that looks at the economic and technical viability of constructing an undersea cable, an electricity and a broadband cable that would connect Georgia to Europe via Romania. We are quite excited about the potential of this cable to address both cybersecurity and, very importantly, energy security concerns, both for Georgia, the South Caucasus regions, because we hope that Azerbaijan and Armenia will participate as well, but also Europe as well, which currently is seeing significant energy challenges right now following the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this feasibility study will be concluded by the end of this calendar year at the very latest, although we do hope to be able to share some preliminary results on the economic feasibility sometime around the summer.
The U.S. ambassador also commented on the bill on transparency of the foreign agents, the so-called bill on foreign agents. Our viewers and followers remember the battles that this bill has triggered within the international and local pro-Western, pro-European community. After the non-stop rallies against the law, Georgian Dream was forced to call back so-called draft laws on agents from the Venice Commission, and the draft adopted in the first reading was brought back to the plenary session and dropped in the second reading.
Well, the people of Georgia, especially the students and the young people, spoke loud and clear, and the ruling party finally listened. Georgia does not need these laws. There are already ample protections and transparency to ensure that all of the financial assistance flowing into Georgia is being used for Georgia's best interests, to help Georgians who are working hard to improve their communities all over this country. That's what foreign assistance has been doing in Georgia for 30 years, and I think all you have to do is look around in almost any community in this country and you will see the very good, positive work that has happened. The people of Georgia now, I think, want to see their government fulfill its pledge to achieve European Union candidate status. And I hope that that now will be where all of the energy and attention is going. This is a tremendous opportunity to improve the lives of every single Georgian. And it's the people of Georgia who are holding the government accountable to that pledge to achieve candidate status.
Even though the ruling party was forced to drop the bill in the second reading, it didn't change its rhetoric much. For example, according to Irakli Kobakhidze, the chairman of Georgian Dream, this draft law has already fulfilled its three important tasks. Everyone admitted that being an agent is shameful, everyone learned about the organizations that are involved in non-state activities, and everyone learned that the Bakuriani plan of the opposition to overthrow the government, as the ruling party believes, will never be implemented. In addition, Kobakhidze thanked People's Power for drafting the bill. We asked Ted Jonas what did the people of Georgia really achieve with their rigorous protest. Ted Jonas is the experienced international lawyer, corporate and non-profit director, legal activist for environmental defense and cultural heritage protection. He currently sits on the supervisory board of Anaklia Development Consortium. Ted, thank you for being with us. Let us start from the positive side of this. What did Georgian people win at this stage by making ruling party pull the draft law?
Yeah, I think it was really important. This was a more forceful demonstration than ones in the past for a couple of reasons. Number one, the youth came out in big numbers for the first time in a long time. Secondly, the anger of the crowd was palpable. Now, that doesn't mean that I like people throwing rocks, and God forbid I don't like people throwing Molotov cocktails. I mean, that's something that shouldn't happen. But it reflected the rage that has built up in society against this government for their persistent disregard of public opinion on the question of Europe. And so it was a stronger demonstration of public will than I think we've seen in any of these demonstrations in recent years. The government perceived that. They are not stupid. And their withdrawal of the law was a smart tactical move on their side. It was definitely a tactical retreat. So it was a victory in a battle, but it is by no means victory in the overall struggle. And what it accomplished, though, was revealing the weakness of this government, that they themselves can't really believe the things that they're saying. It showed, it in a way removed their veneer of invincibility. And we were talking before about the crazy rhetoric that we hear from the Prime Minister talking about Satanists and Kobakhidze talking about scripted things. These are desperate, frightened people. And so it is very important, no matter what the accomplishment was here, and it was an important accomplishment, it's only the beginning, and people need to realize that this is, that to demonstrate, to come out in a rally is a necessary but not a sufficient thing. It has to be followed by organizing, and it has to be followed by grassroots organizing. And I hope that what we're going to see over the next few months leading up to the elections is that citizen activists, not necessarily the opposition political parties, which I think have shown themselves to be not very good anymore at citizen organizing, that activists will organize and spread around the country and talk to people and really mobilize people, because the pro-Europe message is a message that resonates with Georgians. And by the way, when I say the pro-Europe message, I don't mean go and talk to people about the 12 points. Mm-hmm. I mean, as soon as anybody hears the 12 points, they start to fall asleep. Go and talk to people about why Europe is good for Georgia and that this government is obstructing Georgia's European path.
Meanwhile, the government and the ruling party has chosen the same strategy, right? That's what we understood from their statement that,
yes,
that the Georgian Dream has released. NGOs perceive this as the ongoing process of their stigmatization.
Yeah.
Do you see that the same way?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that's what this is all about. That's what their foreign agents law is all about, is about stigmatizing the NGOs. As well as the media. There is literally more space in that law devoted to defining different types of media that it targets. And that's one, for example, significant difference between the U.S. law and this one. The U.S. law exempts media, American-owned media. As long as the media is 80% American-owned, it's entirely exempt from the U.S. law, even if it gets foreign funding. So, yes, they're trying to stigmatize the NGOs. In a way, that shouldn't really matter to what I'm talking about here, because the NGOs are not, I'm sorry to say, going to lead the movement for change in this country. Unfortunately, they don't have popular bases. And so while the NGOs have been critical and extremely important in exposing misconduct by this government, in exposing their Western paths, and I'm very thankful for the role that they play, the truth is that even if the government were to stigmatize the NGOs, in any case, the movement for change here has to come from the public and has to come from a popular base. But of course, that's what they're still trying to do. Just like, you know, they focus on Misha Saakashvili and the United National Movement, okay? That simply shouldn't be relevant, okay, to those of us who want change here.
This stigmatizing, the ruling party turned this term around, right? And they said that stigmatizing it is what we see against the process. I mean, what is the problem in discussing the draft law? While the strategic partners, on the other hand, said that even going into details, even starting to think about having this kind of law is against the European values.
There is a difference between the U.S. perspective on this and U.S. law and European law. The U.S. law probably would not be legal in the European Union. And remember, the U.S. law was passed in 1938. The U.S. law was passed, 90 years ago almost, to target actual enemies of the United States at that time, which was Bolsheviks and Nazis. And there was great concern in 1938 on the eve of World War II about their influence. Under European law, it's simply not acceptable, and they made that clear. It violates a number of provisions of European law.
Let us do some comparison with FARA and keeping in mind what was during these days the main focus of the ruling party, that this is the law on transparency.
Right. The point is that, first of all, they didn't even raise it in a manner of, let's discuss the problem of so-called foreign influence in Georgian society and in the Georgian government. Had they done so, the primary target would have been Russian influence, because there are serious concerns. Number one, Russia is an enemy of Georgia, and even the ruling party has to admit that sometimes. And so there was no discussion, a public discussion, about Russian influence with organizations like Alt-Info, Russian influence with organizations that are openly following the Kremlin line. Had there been a discussion, they could have talked about Western influence, they could have talked about Russian influence, they could have said, is there a way to address this? How can we address it in a targeted way that protects our national security? That's not at all what they did. Instead, it began with months and months or even years of accusations against NGOs in Georgian society that do a good job of exposing their problems, all of which are funded not by Russia, but by the European Union and the United States, who are supposed to be allies of Georgia. So from the very beginning, this whole thing was driven not by a desire for transparency, but by a desire to stigmatize and punish Western-funded organizations.
And we remember what Gobakidze said on Namakhvani case, for example, right? He said that, you know, when Namakhvani gets into the register of agents, of so-called agents, there we will see some Russian influences, but not only.
Also a very interesting comment. And also, again, what does he pick as an example of so-called Russian influence is a citizen movement to stop what they see as an environmentally destructive project. He does not select any of the organizations that are allied with the Georgian Dream Party. And this, I think, is an extremely important point. we can talk about the many differences between the U.S. law and the Georgian law. And one of the big differences is not only in the wording of the laws, and those are very different, and who they target, but also in the enforcement of the law. You can go online and you can Google prosecutions under the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act, and you will get a list from the official U.S. Justice Department website of 14 prosecutions that have been brought since 2007 under the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act. The vast majority of those 14 prosecutions were brought by the United States Justice Department during Trump's administration against people connected to Trump. Those were campaign staff, advisors, and even employees of the White House who had been secretly lobbying for Russian interests or for Yanukovych's interests. Literally 7 out of the 14 cases that have been brought under the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act were brought under Trump's administration against Trump's allies, against Russian interests, which tells you that, thankfully, we in the United States do have a strong tradition of prosecutorial and judicial independence. And even though the Justice Department is nominally under the president's control and he appoints the Attorney General, nonetheless, the prosecutors are bound by law to act independently. Now, unfortunately, I would love to see the day when in this country the Prosecutor General brings cases against people who are connected to the ruling party. Until now, I haven't seen that.
Since you mentioned allies, I mean, FARA also exempts allies, right?
Correct,
I mean, it does totally opposite.
Completely,
that
yes.
was
FARA exempts religious organizations, academic organizations, cultural organizations. It exempts the media if they're majority U.S. Owned, and it exempts allies, countries which have been certified by the president to be aligned with the defense and national security interests of the United States. So it would literally be impossible, it is illegal under the U.S. FARA to require reporting of an organization or a person who receives funding from a NATO ally. Okay? Whereas this law in Georgia makes no distinction whatsoever, and we know from their rhetoric that it is targeted against the West. It is targeted against Western allies. Okay? So, as I've pointed out before, the Georgian Dream government is today defining Western Europe and the United States as equivalent to the Nazis and the Soviet Union versus the United States in 1938. They have defined them as their enemies. How can there be any question that they are serving Russian interests when they define the main enemies of Russia, the main enemies of Ukraine, the main enemies of the Western alliance, when they do not target the law against them, they instead target the law against the allies of Georgia?
This is also clear when you are speaking, and I cannot understand how anyone cannot understand what you are just pointing at. However, we can see people, not a small number of people who are very keen on getting more transparency, as they call it, of the NGO sector. When, on the other hand, they do not have that urge when it is about taxes, when it is about public funds. IDFI just had a very recent study which said that 2022 was the worst year in terms of this transparency.
I ran a business here for years, a law firm, okay, which is of course a different sector, but we had to file enormous numbers of documents, like any business here, with the Revenue Service, identifying all sources of income. The same is true of NGOs, and in fact, most Georgian NGOs have to comply not only with Georgian law on revealing all of their sources of income, but they have to reveal it to their donors and their funders, and they put out annual reports. So transparency is a good thing, but that is, when they say that this law is about transparency, they're lying. Because again, number one, current law already requires disclosure of sources of funding, and number two, they are not seeking transparency of political groups, far-right political groups, and pro-Russian groups that are allied with them. So that is not about transparency. That is simply an excuse. Just like their statements that somehow people who oppose this law are against the Georgian Orthodox Church. Where does that come from? That's just a completely made up piece of propaganda. Just like the idea that, somehow the West wants Bidzina Ivanishvili to become prime minister and then get Georgia into a war with Ukraine. I don't even understand how that makes sense. And they think that Credit Suisse is organizing all of that. This is absolutely Nazi, Goebbels level kind of propaganda, Stalinist kind of propaganda, where you have no qualms and no compunction about lying to people and simply perpetuating those lies. The only thing I can say is, again, that the amount of lying that they're doing and the extremism of the lying that they're undertaking, especially in the last couple of days, shows how desperate and afraid they are. And people should take that as a moment of courage and a sign to continue to have courage.
My next question comes to you as to the businessman then, since you mentioned your law firm. I heard some of the analysis which says that these protests have undermined business environment in Georgia. But as I see the process is that those investors that are Western investors with the European values, institutional investors, that we do not have at this point, or we have very few at this point in the country, they got the message that the people are for these values. What is your take on that?
My take on it is that you will not have significant Western investment in this country when the court system is controlled by the government, when the prosecutor is not independent, when economic freedom is displaced by essentially a feudal system controlled by one oligarch who directs the government what to do. That is the major reason that you don't see foreign investment in this country or more foreign investment in this country. It's interesting that in Israel, what's happening right now and the protests that are going on in Israel against the government, Israeli businesses are standing up and saying, we will not work in a society where the courts are controlled and are not independent. In Israel, the businesses are standing up and speaking out against the non-democratic system. My point is that, first of all, it's the non-democratic system. It's the weak rule of law. It's the bad court system that undermines foreign investment here. When the people actually stand up and react against it, and that results inevitably in political and social instability, because that's what happens when people are demanding political change. Yeah, you're not going to see foreign investors running in that situation either. But if this process leads to the establishment of a more democratic system and rule of law and a stable and reliable government, then you will see more investment here. And I really want to emphasize this point. It is in the business community's interest in Georgia to speak out against this law and against the anti-European approach of this government. They know it, but they're afraid. And I would ask them, Georgians always talk about how much they love Israel and how much they admire Israel. I would ask them to look at the Israeli example and look at what Israeli banks are saying. Look at what Israeli high-tech companies are saying. They are speaking out because they have a democracy and they don't want it ruined. And Georgian businesses should know, I believe they do know, that their interest is in European integration. Their interest is in a relationship with the United States. It is not in their interest to be in a feudalized economy that is controlled by one figure and their opportunities are cut off, and if they want anything, they have to go beg the prime minister for it, or they have to go beg Bidzina Ivanishvili for it. That is not in the interest of the business community. But they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, is that they feel that if they speak out against the government, then they're going to be punished for it. So it's a vicious cycle where the government continues to press and press and press on them and limit their entrepreneurial freedom. But on the other hand, they are afraid to do something about it. And by the way,
but we still hear some voices, right?
Make one point. Of course, that didn't start with this government. The previous government, the UNM government, was as bad or even worse in that regard in the way that they controlled and suppressed the business sector. And it was the same problem at that time. And literally, the businesses, have gone from essentially quiet collaboration with the UNM government to quiet collaboration with this government. And somebody needs to step up, be willing to step up, and it would be good if it's like Benjamin Franklin said, Mr. Kvanchilashvili's favorite American founder, Benjamin Franklin said, either we all hang together or we shall hang separately, which is of course sort of a pun on the hang together means to stick together. You stick together, you have power.
You are addressing the whole business community,
yes.
right? Because we've seen some voices, we've heard some voices.
Who?
We've seen people standing there from the business community as well.
At the demonstrations?
Yes.
Yes, and there's no question about that. I mean, of course, I know tons of people in the business community. You know, opinion in the business community is for the West, and opinion in the business community is with the demonstrators. But they are afraid to speak out publicly. Are they talking behind closed doors? Are they lobbying Kvanchilashvili, who doesn't really matter? Are they lobbying Bidzina behind closed doors? I hope so. Knowing many of these people, I expect they probably are. But at some point, they need to say something public. I think it's great that people from, you know, employees of the business community, I would say most of them, by the way, are mid and lower level management, not top management, but maybe there's some cases of top management, are coming out and protesting. That's good, because that itself involves courage. And I love the fact that the dear lady who was out there against the fire hoses with the European Union flag is an employee of the city government, as I understand. So that means that she's really courageous.
We already heard Kvanchilashvili saying that this was staged according to the textbooks that are written about how to manage the protests and how to manipulate emotion.
Let me just put it very directly. Kvanchilashvili is a liar. Kvanchilashvili says what the messaging of the week is for the party. He's a propagandist, okay, and that is what he is. Kvanchilashvili doesn't necessarily believe what he says. He says what he thinks will resonate with their voters. I think that they are also increasingly out of touch with their voters. They may be a small section of extremists who are very vocal on social media that respond to the rhetoric that he uses or who find it appealing. But this is all messaging, and you know, Kvanchilashvili is a guy who delivers messages that he's been instructed to deliver. He's the master message spinner for this government, and so I think that we probably spend too much time listening to what he says and listening to what Kvanchilashvili says, because it's just propaganda. And it's important to hear it to know what their messaging is, but once you accept that it's really just false narratives that serve their political ends, then you don't need to overreact to it anymore. It's just like, okay, I know that's what they're going to say, and in order to oppose them, I've got my program, and I know what I'm going to do in order to oppose them. But don't even bother to think that what they're saying is true at this point.
At this point, what are some of the threats that this protest has mitigated, and what are some of the threats that are still in place, that still remain?
Sadly, I don't think that the protests have mitigated any threats yet, because you know, maybe we could hope for a few minutes after they withdrew the law that would be the case. But the extremism of their rhetoric in the last 2 days indicates that they are even more aggressive and more worked up than they were before. The one consolation I take in that is that I believe that the opposition, and by that I do not mean the political parties or even the NGOs, I mean the youth, and I mean people around this country, the opposition is stronger and they are weaker. So they may be more aggressive, but it's an aggression that's born out of desperation.
What do you think about the president's role during this whole process?
That's a fascinating subject. It really is a very interesting subject. I want to say first off that I first met Salome Zurabishvili. She would not remember it, and she may not remember ever meeting me, but I first met Salome Zurabishvili in probably 2000 or 2001 in New York when she was still a French or EU diplomat. And she gave a speech to the Georgian Association of the United States at an event in New York City. And I was absolutely taken with her. Here's somebody whose background is from an old Georgian family that resisted Bolshevism, that stood up for the independence of this country. I believe that despite all the missteps that Salome Zurabishvili has made, that is still who she is fundamentally underneath, is that she's fundamentally underneath the daughter of an immigrant anti-Bolshevik family, and a family that stood for Georgia's independence against both the Russian Empire as well as the Soviet Union. All of that said, she is, of course, in a difficult position. The president doesn't have actual very many powers besides essentially her ability to speak. She was put into office literally by the Georgian Dream. She was an ally and a partner of the Georgian Dream for a long time. She did not like the Misha government, as we all know. But I respect that she has been trying to establish not only a distance between herself and them, but she has been the only respectable, the only honorable spokesperson for the Georgian government on the public scene. When I see Salome Zurabishvili on CNN or France 24, I don't cringe in disgust. I like what she's saying. Now, I hope she will continue to build her courage. And I know it's
what
not...
What else she could do?
And, well, of course, there's many things that she could do. She has said she would veto this law, and so she's begun to use her veto power. That's a good thing. I think that she should pardon Misha Saakashvili. And the reason is not because I am a fan of Misha Saakashvili. I think it's well known probably that I was quite a critic of his government, and I believe that Misha Saakashvili is sadly today somebody who can have no role in Georgian politics because of the physical and mental destruction that he has gone through. There's a lot of reasons, and I won't get off on that. No, Misha Saakashvili is a human rights case. Misha Saakashvili is a humanitarian case. And his treatment in prison and his situation in prison is yet another black mark on Georgia, in the same way that this law was a black mark on Georgia. So I think that literally for humanitarian reasons, and in order to remove him as a factor in all of this, and again, I want to emphasize, I don't want to see Misha Saakashvili on the political scene, and I don't believe he even can be on the political scene. And anybody who thinks that Misha Saakashvili could be a political leader is either a provocateur, which is what happens from the Georgian government side, or people who are sadly deluded. But simply for humanitarian reasons, he ought to be released. Nika Gvaramia's conviction was ridiculous. And I always say that of all the things that Nika Gvaramia could have been prosecuted for, especially from his days in the UNM government, it's ironic that they prosecuted him on something completely ridiculous. So, what was essentially a groundless criminal case run through the courts, just the way they did with Khazaradze and Japaridze and every other figure. Gvaramia, probably should be pardoned because he shouldn't have been put in, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
He shouldn't have been put in prison. But Gvaramia seems to be holding up very well in prison, which I respect. I think he's kind of been a model of resistance in prison. So she could, I think that, that's probably the one thing further that she could do. But I really want to emphasize that she's doing a lot of good, in my opinion. A lot of people are very cynical about her. A lot of people are critics. Many of my friends, they disagree with me when I...
Probably because they remember how she was saying that Georgia started the war in 2008, which is a terrible statement.
And she also made some terrible statements about how we don't need an army, or we're not going to win with an army. And unfortunately, she does not always have good political judgment about what she says. But again, nonetheless, on a scene where the government is literally full of scoundrels, I mean, people that I don't even know how they can show their face in public, and I certainly don't know how they can show their faces in Europe because they're a disgrace. At least she's not a disgrace. She is largely standing for the right things. She's been consistently pro-Ukrainian. She's been consistently critical of Russia. She has been consistently pro-Western. And, you know, at least that is somebody representing this country and is representing the government who gives us some dignity and self-respect, in my opinion. I'm glad she's there.
Prime Minister said that most of the people in the streets were deluded. They do not know what they stand for. Are we deluded?
Of course not. No, this is again what I'm saying. This is again propaganda. Mr. Kvanchilashvili, it's interesting. Maybe he actually, I don't want to say anything insulting, but maybe he actually believes what he's saying. Kobachidze, they say, is smarter than that. and smart enough to not believe the things he's saying. He's just a good propagandist. But again, those kinds of statements, they're diluted. That's for his audience. You know, that is for what he thinks is his audience. I think that his audience, his voters, are declining in number. And that the number of people who believe that kind of stuff is getting smaller and smaller. But really, we should not, I'm past the point where I get worked up over the things they say. I used to. I couldn't believe, I was like, oh my God, they're so stupid. I thought they were stupid. And then I realized they're not stupid. This is very intentional. And so take it that way. You don't expect your enemy, somebody who is against your interests in every way, to say things that are helpful to you or truthful or that you can believe. Well, that's them.
The argument there that comes from the Prime Minister personally is, look whose signature is on the association agreement. We have DCFTA,
Yeah.
we have visa liberalization,
Yes.
we got the European perspective.
Right.
So how can I be against the candidacy status of the country?
Because Mr. Kvanchilashvili told him to be against it. That's the answer to that question. No, I think that, you know, we could have a circle of experts here and have a long discussion and debate about what was the nature of the Georgian Dream Party, what was the nature of the Georgian Dream Coalition, were they pro-Russian ab initio, is it a matter of ideology, you know, this, that, and the other thing.
Can it be the fear of the war? Do you think they really fear that Russia might start war in Georgia?
Yeah, I do think that they fear that. I think that they fear it, and that is why they are doing what Russia wants. And I believe that they communicate with the Russians. But yes, because they're cowards and they're frightened. Now that's not to say, I was here in the war in 2008. I know very well this country's, and I was here close up front to it. I know very well this country's vulnerability to Russia militarily, even if Georgia has the best army that it can have. And even in a situation like right now where Russia is weakened, they can still overrun this country because it's just too small and its army is too small. It has to have a deterrent, but Georgia cannot, I'm sorry to say, win a war against Russia. All it can do is have a strong enough military to deter them. They say to be a porcupine, something that's hard to eat, hard to swallow. That's like what the Baltic countries are. That's the best thing that we can hope for. So,
and the strategic allies.
And strategic allies. Strategic allies who will back us up in case of a conflict. But yeah, I think they are afraid. I think that essentially, to sum it up, I think there's at least 2 or 3 things that go on in the minds of the Georgian Dream or what drives them. Number one is, I believe that Bidzina Ivanishvili enjoys being the feudal lord of Georgia. He is the Eristavi or Mepe of this place. He rules by an informal authority. It protects his situation. He can get any land that he wants, as you can well see by what he did around Tbilisi with the Panorama Project and the Mount Tabor Project, which violated zoning laws, violated historical protection laws. He can do and get anything he wants. He is comfortable here. This is his domain. He's Georgian, he's not Russian. So even though he lived in Russia for a long time, Kartvelia, this is his language, this is his culture, this is his place, this is where he would rather be. Okay, so I believe his primary, Bidzin Ivanishvili's primary thing, I want to have a nice place. It's Chimi Bachia, it's Chimi Mamule, you know, this is my thing. So if maintaining that position early on required maintaining Georgia's Western path, which has been very popular in terms of NATO and the EU, that's what they did. At some point, I believe that the Russians started to pull the noose tighter on them and started to have greater security concerns about Georgia, and greater opposition or wanted to lay down the line and say, no, you're not going to go towards the EU. And we have seen, at what point was it? Was it after 2014 and the invasion of Crimea? As you know, I'm on the board of the Inaklia Development Consortium. We have direct evidence that they responded to Russian pressure and security concerns about Russia in killing the Inaklia project. So they were already very much, and remember, they started out supporting that project, just like they started out supporting the EU. I believe that something turned their orientation. I believe that was pressure from Russia, which has made them fearful. Some people would say that it accelerated this kind of anti-Western stance, pro-Russian stance, and alignment with Russian propaganda, that it accelerated beginning in early 2021 after the 2020 elections. Maybe, though you can have a debate about that, there's certainly signs of it, but for sure it accelerated after the renewed Russian invasion of Ukraine 1 year ago. And from that moment, that's when you start hearing vicious anti-Ukraine rhetoric, defeatist and cowardly comments from this government, all kinds of statements against the Maidan revolution, against Ukrainians standing up from themselves, defeatist rhetoric. It's all absolutely aligned with the Kremlin's position. So I think that again, none of us know for sure, but my speculation is that there was communication between the people in the Russian government, the people in the Georgian government that talked to each other that said, you better not cause us the smallest problem down there, because we're getting everybody in line. And we need to show that we have people on our side, and we need to see that we've got you on our side.
And suddenly everything that was still like a long-term opportunity became a very close opportunity after this war, with the candidacy status, with
that's true. Very good point.
Precise
it's a very good point. It became
Europe.
real. It made it real. And I think that really what happened is that just as Putin drew the line in front of Yanukovych in 2013, 2014 and said, you shall not proceed with an association agreement with Europe, they waited longer with us, but they drew that line. And they said, you shall not proceed with the European Union. And I don't care what their rhetoric is today, it is very obvious that this foreign agents law was meant to knock the country off the EU path. Why do I say that? Because the Europeans themselves said it. The Europeans said, if you adopt this, this is against Europe. The United States said it. So how much more explicit did they need to be? There are some people who said they need to be more explicit. I'm sorry, it was very clear to me exactly the message that they were getting. They have absolutely no desire to join the European Union. Bidzin Ivanishvili has no desire to join the European Union. Like I said, he enjoys a place that gives him his own law and his own control, and a European system of transparency, regulation, independent prosecutors and courts, proper property laws and zoning laws.
It's all about checks and balances.
It will not, that does not serve him. So, he doesn't want it. And these people are doing his bidding. And so that's another point, is that I believe that all of us need to accept there is no matter what they say, they have no desire to be in the European Union. They have absolutely shown that. And what this is about is, if the Georgian people want to be a part of Europe, as they have for hundreds of years, and as every government since 1991 in this country fought for, they have to fight to be in Europe. They have to fight against this government, because this government is an enemy of Georgia joining the European Union. Now, another point. I believe that Georgia can stand up for its dignity, its sovereignty, and its European perspective without going to war with Russia, okay? You can see that in Moldova's case, because they're moving forward, and Moldova is even more vulnerable than Georgia is to Russian attack and Russian subjugation. You can see it even in Salome Zurabishvili's statements and rhetoric. In some way, she's an example of the kind of statements and rhetoric that the government ought to be making, okay? Do you have any dignity? Do you have any self-respect? Okay, so you stand up for your dignity and your self-respect, and you say, this is going to be my line, and this is the direction I'm going. My bet is that the Russians will not interfere on that basis. Bidzin Ivanishvili is better off not in the European Union. He feels he's better off under Russian control. So therefore, in a lot of ways, in Russia's orbit, not under Russia's control, and in Russia's orbit. And so the fear narrative complements anyway what is his self-interest.
Maybe it's time for Gen Z and
One
other
hopes.
generations.
I want Gen Z to take control. I want Gen Z to be the leaders of this, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
And last but not the least, more on this week's business news and outlook pulled together and presented by our reporter Natia Taktakishvili.
Hotel Rumskarte is switching to a seasonal operation after the winter ski season expires. General manager of the hotel Akaki Chikwadze says that the management of Rumskarte made this decision due to the unprofitability of Bakuriani as a mountain resort in other seasons. As he notes, Rumskarte decided to switch to seasonal operation last year. This means that the hotel will be closed by the end of March and will open with new forces in December. According to him, the income of Rumskarte will not decrease due to the closure of the hotel. The loss will not be big because Bakuriani is not very loaded during these months, so the period is less profitable. Bakuriani has a different low price policy in summer than in winter, due to which we made our final decision, he said. Comprising 95 guest rooms, Rumskarte is a part of Ajara Group, which also includes hotels in Khazbegi and Tbilisi. Mariam Tauberidze, the founder of Georgian clothing brand Hamu Concept, says that proper communication with the customer is the most important thing for the company. The point is that the National Agency of Competition has developed a regulation which obliges all traders to indicate the price of the product clearly, both in trading facilities and on social media. According to the founder of Hamu Concept, those companies that don't indicate the price of the product on social platforms try to increase the company's activity on Facebook or Instagram pages. When I don't see the product price, I lose the desire to communicate with this company. It's a great inconvenience and a waste of time for the customer. In other words, it can be considered as a violation of their rights, said Mariam Tauberidze. According to Tauberidze, stores are obliged to provide the customer with complete information about the product, including the price, because in many cases customers choose the product based on the cost. Madu Romanidze, the founder of Marona Collection, says that the handmade bags by the Georgian brand Marona Collection will be sold in Galeries Lafayette in France from 2024. According to her, the brand has already entered the international market and the products are sold in Serbia, England, France and America. In addition to the great interest in the international market, the demand for the product is also high in the Georgian market. That's why Madu Romanidze created the conceptual store Chatsma, which combines the works of several Georgian designers. Chatsma is located in Galeria Tbilisi and Kote Abkhazi Street. Marona Collection has been operating in the market since 2019 and it employs 50 people. The brand offers customers colorful and diverse clothes and accessories. Anna Sulaberidze, the founder of the cosmetic brand Euphoria, declares that raw materials have become more expensive, so all products are increased in price in the recent years. According to Anna Sulaberidze, the main problem is the imports of specific ingredients. Raw materials are not produced in Georgia, and in fact everything is imported. In addition to raw materials, the company also imports packaging items. The founder evaluated last year as quite successful and noted that the company added many loyal customers. Euphoria is operating on the Georgian market for 6 years and offers its customers handmade, natural body and personal care products. Euphoria employs 10 people. Nino Khachidze, head of sales department of Kerki, declares that Kerki products have received great approval, both in the Baltic states as well as in Poland and Canada. According to her, the company produces products using the natural raw materials without any additives, and this is the main reason for interest. For 2023, we have doubled the intake of raw materials and bought about 150,000 kilograms of raw materials from farmers. We will send over 2 tons of products to those countries, she said. As for the future plans, Kerki is going to open stores in Tbilisi and Batumi. Kerki appeared on the market in 2021. The company employs 30 people and their number increases to 50 during this season. Kerki products are sold in the supermarket chain of Goodwill, Europroduct, Waymart and Smart. Georgian cosmetic brand Maskin appeared on the local market several months ago. Jonas, co-founder of the brand, says that the organic product has already received great approval due to its high quality. Many foreign brand products are imported in Georgia and there is a huge competition in this field. While we are trying to produce Georgian natural products for customers, our product is made without any chemical mixtures. The grass from cosmetics is provided from the Alpine zone, the founder explains. Speaking about the future plans, the founder says the brand plans to make exports and expand. Maskin is currently offering 6 types of products. The price ranges from 28 lari to 76 lari. The products are available on online platforms as well as in various cosmetic cabinets. The brand employs up to 10 people. Mamuka Kiladze, the founder of newly opened restaurant Napoli, says that Italian restaurant which brings together Neapolitan flavors is successful and demand exceeded expectations. According to him, they opened the first facility in Saguramo with a grant of 30,000 lari from Enterprise Georgia, and the rest was their personal funds. We are glad that the demand is increasing further. Customers from all segments come to us, and this motivates us not to stop and moving forward and to think about opening new branches in the future, said Mamuka Kiladze. According to him, Napoli managed to establish itself in the competitive market with high quality and correct communication with the customers. He also talks about the challenges related to the shortage of qualified personnel, unstable market and lack of quality raw materials. Currently, the restaurant employs 70 people. Satibe is a new settlement near Tbilisi located in the village of Orbeti. The small town already unites 240 families. According to Irakli Gaprindashvili, founder of the complex, they plan to expand the town further by adding new facilities including bread cafes. As he notes, most of the land plots are already sold in the complex. We want to create recreational zones. Satibe also works on the tourist segment. We want to receive guests, entertain them in our homes and offer tasty food. Very soon we will open the bread cafe as well as a bakery museum. In general, we want to turn this place into a kind of bread road, he notes. According to the founder of Satibe, the most important thing is that Satibe brought general plan to Orbeti, which avoids chaotic construction unlike to other villages. I think that after the implementation of our project, Satibe will turn into a kind of tourist center for Tetritskharo municipality. Our project has already created civilization in Orbeti, where the first store is also opened, Gaprindashvili explained.
That's all for today. We will meet next Sunday at 11 a.m. sharp. But before that, please follow us on bm.g and forbes.g for more updates and analysis. See you soon.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.